Well, welcome everybody to today's Brown Bag series. Thank you for joining us and taking the time to of your day to join us in today's talk about Harvard's humanitarian initiatives, chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear capacity building programs in Ukraine. We have the great pleasure of having Donell Harvin, who is a visiting scientist at HHI. And also, I just found out today he's also the former chief of Homeland Security and Intelligence. Just a brief introduction. Donell Harvin is also a public health and weapons of mass destructions expert from Washington, D.C., and he oversees these programs at HHI. He has deployed on several missions to Ukraine in 2002 with HHI to engage in a capacity building activities related to CBRN. He serves as the faculty at Georgetown University, teaching graduate courses in disaster management, countering weapons of mass destructions, and homeland security, often called upon to provide expert analysis for NBC, NBC News, CNN News, and members of Congress. He is also a subject matter expert for several organizations, including the United Nations Office for Counterterrorism, Interpol CBRN directorates, and the RAND corporations. So with great pleasure, I'd like to introduce you to Donell Harvin, and I'll give the floor to him now to present the CBRN's programs at HHI. And Donell, happy birthday. Thank you for joining us on your birthday
Oh,
as well.
yeah. Thank you. I don't know how that slipped in, but I appreciate it. Thank you so much. There's nothing better than talking about a topic that I'm passionate about on my birthday. Uh, so um, so we're going to get started. I don't like to be too structured, so we'll start off with my bio, which I'm sure you can read, um, just like it was introduced. But I want to start at the beginning. So if you can just entertain me for a few minutes, I'm going to show you really in a few minutes what this project is turned into. Let me stop because I always do this.
Thank you so much, Donell. And just before you start that talk, I just wanted to also remind everyone that our speakers' remarks are based on their own scholarships and experience, and as such, they do not speak for Harvard. So thank you so much for.
Great. All right, let me know if you can hear this.
Not
Harvard
yet.
Humanitarian Initiative.
Can you hear that? Okay, we're going to start from the beginning.
Hi, my name is Donell Harvin. I'm with the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative. Today, we took our master instructors through a very realistic scenario that they may face. We started off by giving them a lecture, which gave them the understanding and the content to face a CBRN, chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear event. Then we had them suit up, as you can see. We had them suit up in protective suits. We had them put masks on and protective equipment so they can go to the scenario safely and come back safely. Then you're going to find we took them down a long series of walking areas, through staircases, through small narrow passages to realistically recreate what they may find going to a CBRN event. When they approach the event, they're going to find a scenario in which we had a radiological device explode. We call that a dirty bomb. You can see that the dirty bomb creates a lot of smoke, but it also creates radiological contamination. This team's task was to go in to identify the source of the radiation through all of this smoke, to bring out and rescue any victims, to assess the victims for bleeding or major trauma, to decontaminate the victims, and to treat those victims and come back safely. Scenarios like this bring real life examples to these master instructors so they can train other instructors and other students in Ukraine for the situations that they may face in the real world.
So I guess the question is now, the glaring question is, how do we get here? And it started with in the spring of 2022, when the war had just broke out in Ukraine, HHI was approached by IMC, who many of you know is a great partner with HHI in other regions and other projects. Through their contacts with USAID and the Ministry of Health in Ukraine, they established a need for certain core capabilities that they really lacked. And the capabilities were trauma care training, mass casualty management, and then CBRN. Now, CBRN was really not a core competency of HHI heretofore. We had experts, and this is the team, who had other competencies that CBRN touched. CBRN touches all these things: pre-hospital care, trauma nursing. We have Tim Erickson, who is a world-renowned toxicologist who had done a lot of CBRN work. But to build out a CBRN program within HHI to deliver to Ukraine within the short amount of time that was given required a whole team effort. So I always pause on this slide because I don't talk about the work that we've done without acknowledging the team. There's not a person on this slide that hasn't been instructive or assisted in the CBRN space, along with their lines of effort. So it's been a really collaborative space where we've been able to grow and learn together and be able to provide the best possible outcomes for our partners on the ground in Ukraine. And so you can see kind of like, I don't want to bore you with charts and org charts and things, but CBRN really made up a small portion of the overall effort that spans many individuals in HHI across the entire network of Harvard and the affiliated hospitals. But we had to reach out to other people that we knew in the industry, and that's just not the CBRN line of effort, that's all the lines of effort. We had to tap into our communities, our respective subject matter expert communities, to help support our efforts. And that towards the end, I have a slide of how many instructors, we have expat instructors and trained instructors in Ukraine that assisted this project. This is really a monumental project that spanned over 2.5 years. And so the question is, why CBRN, right? You don't think of humanitarian disasters and CBRN in the same space, right? When we think of, and I teach humanitarian disasters here at Georgetown, I'm at Georgetown right now, and I also teach CBRN. There's 2 separate courses, right? I don't talk about humanitarian disasters in my CBRN course, and I don't talk about CBRN in my humanitarian disasters course. So for me, this was kind of an epiphany. CBRN, normally our humanitarian disasters that we're dealing with are conflict and strife. They're brought on by climate change, sometimes the confluence of both of those things, often particularly in certain regions that are particularly sensitive to climate change and have political instability. And those things can lead to starvation, large-scale forced movement, migrations, and all the other things that we're used to dealing with in the humanitarian space. CBRN, however, can create on its own humanitarian crises intrinsically. And so now layer CBRN on top of an existing humanitarian crisis, which was Ukraine, war-torn country with humanitarian crisis, and then the prospect of the CBRN use. Now, that's not something that's just hypothesized in some corners of the Department of Defense. This was a true fear of many individuals, not only here in the US, but in the international community. And so as the war got going, as the war ramped up, the potential for the use of CBRN by state or non-state actors, which is very important to note, violent non-state actors, terrorist individuals who are not necessarily beholden to international sanctions and laws against the use of CBRN, became a real reality. I'm going to share these slides with you, so if anyone's there vigorously taking notes, no need. And within all these snapshots, there's an embedded link, so you can actually go to, and here, this is the State Department report about their concerns with CBRN, the confirmation that the State Department's made, and this is just this year, of the use of chemical weapons being used in the battleground in Ukraine, as well as some of the other things. So you can just click on them and you'll go to those articles directly. And then we have, the normal saber rattling or threats that are made in any conflict. But in this particular case, and this is unique, to respond to a humanitarian crisis in which one of the actors involved in the conflict is a nuclear power, and the leader of that conflict, of that nuclear power, has repeatedly threatened to use nuclear weapons. And once again, besides nuclear, which is CBRN's chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, there's a whole lot of other things. There's also a very robust biological research program that was ongoing before the war broke out in Ukraine. And that brought a lot of concern to many in the international community, as well as us in the US, about biosecurity and biosafety, and reducing biothreats. And so the US government, as a whole of government, has a biothreat reduction program. There's a link for that there in the slide as well that you can look up, that addresses some of the concerns about the potential for a biological agent being accidentally or intentionally released from one of these facilities, let's say. And then, of course, there's a historical context. CBRN has been used in a war scenario. And here I'm going to share with you a video. I want to warn you, this video is a little jarring. It's about 3 minutes long. It's produced by Human Rights Watch, and it describes the use of chemical weapons in Syria during the conflict. So if you want to see this on your own, you can just go to the link I have there. You click on video on the bottom right, and the video should play, and let's cross our fingers. Can you hear this?
In the last 6 months, the Syrian government has used warplanes, helicopters and ground forces to deliver chlorine and sarin in Damascus, Hama, Idlib and Aleppo. That's widespread and systematic use of chemical weapons, which could amount to crimes against humanity. On April 4, 2017, a chemical attack in Khan Sheikhoun, a town in northern Syria, killed at least 92 people, including 30 children. Human Rights Watch interviewed 32 witnesses and analyzed dozens of photos and video, and all the evidence strongly supports the conclusion that a Syrian government warplane dropped a chemical bomb containing a nerve agent.
بعد وصل طبيعة اختي كانوا جايبين جثة أول شهيد من عائلتنا. أنا هم مباشرة ضميته ولفيته وبسته، كان الزبد طالع من تمه. يعني الضربة كانت كتير قريبة عن بيتي، يعني كانت صدمة كبيرة انه يصير استخدام غاز، يعني ما كنا متوقعين لهالدرجه.
الوفاة صار عندنا يعني بين ال 24 وبين 26، بين اطفال وبين حريم وبين رجال.
Witnesses say they heard and saw a warplane flying over the town that morning, just before people started getting sick. One person even said he saw the warplane drop a bomb and that it struck in front of the town's bakery. Witnesses said they saw a lot of smoke after the plane flew over, but they hadn't heard an explosion. And that is consistent with a chemical bomb, which has a very small explosive charge to not destroy the chemicals. When a sarin bomb hits the ground, much of the sarin, which is liquid, will evaporate, but not all of it. And some of the first photos of the crater show what appears to be liquid on the asphalt around. And finally, remnants found in the crater are consistent with a Soviet-made airdropped sarin bomb. Khan Sheikhoun is not the only place where Syrian government forces appear to have used nerve agents recently. Human Rights Watch has documented 3 other cases in which a government warplane appeared to have dropped a nerve agent.
So I'm going to stop there. I think you get the idea. And so that became the mission, is really to help civilian health and medical workers, as well as emergency response first responders, prepare for really the unthinkable, which is the use of a chemical, biological, radiological, or nuclear or explosive, large-scale explosive device with the backdrop of an existing humanitarian disaster. And so we set out to develop CBRN training materials for these individuals, to translate those trainings into Ukraine, to deliver those courses and conduct train-the-trainer courses to help purchase supplies and equipment to either ship to Ukraine. Where possible, we actually carried them by ourselves, by hand, and to deliver that training without a virtual presence. And obviously the return home safely, which is the goal of any humanitarian mission, particularly when you're in a conflict or war zone. This is just a map for some folks who may be familiar with Ukraine, where we've conducted these trainings on the ground. Once again, the HHI team, supported by many people within the network and many of our affiliated expat instructors. The ones in orange are the cities I visited to personally during the last 2.5 years. And we obviously experienced some complexity, so I would like to share those with you. Translating materials into Ukraine posed a problem, not a major problem. We have not only great enabling partners in IMC on the ground that helped us with that, but there's also a diaspora of Ukrainians in the Boston and Cambridge region that are affiliated with HHI that assisted with that. But when we got on the ground, we realized that not everyone speaks Ukrainian or is fluent in Ukrainian or reads Ukrainian. As a former Soviet republic, the further away we got from the capital, we found that many people, particularly older people, spoke primarily or more fluent in Russian. And so that was something that we and our translators had to deal with. Getting equipment and supplies into Ukraine was difficult because it's a country in war. And so many of the supplies that are specific to CBRN were deemed as dual-use technology and were blocked by ITAR, which is an international trade in arms agreement. And so we had to get creative, and I'll show you how we did that. Getting access to some of the cities, sometimes it took a while because the trains weren't running. You can't fly into Kyiv. The international airports are shut down. And so a lot of it's transporting ourselves and the equipment to the border, switching vehicles a few times just to get where to go. So logistics was a huge hurdle. Fortunately, we have a great team on the ground that managed that, and I don't think there were any mishaps. Like no one woke up in the wrong city or went to the wrong place. Everything was really tight in terms of our movement, in terms of our safety. Those were non-issues. But they didn't. Our team at IMC really cut no corners in terms of safety. They assured that we were aware of plans if there were any safety issues. That there were places that we can hibernate or relocate, that we can evacuate if necessary. We made aware of that before we were in country, as well as when we got into country. We started our day with a safety briefing. And so we felt really confident we can go and do this training. And if anything were happening, there was someone that would watch our back and make sure that we would be safe. Recruiting instructors and people to participate became a challenge in some areas because as I mentioned, all those individuals that we were targeting are frontline essential workers. And so how do you pull them out of a hospital or for an EMS shift or wherever they're working to do a 2-day course? And so we had to get creative with that and acknowledge the fact that some of the people we wanted to reach out and provide this training to that would help build the capacity after we're long gone were individuals that were engaged actively in doing their essential duties. And obviously this is a war zone, so people can get burnt out, people can get PTSD. And so that's an issue. All the CBRN equipment you see here, we were able to source on, Amazon, let's just say. And so by doing that, we were able to deliver the training in a very high quality way with equipment that really wasn't high quality. So there's a plus and a minus to that. The plus is we're able to do the job and able to circumvent obstacles in terms of being able to conduct the training, legally circumvent. I want to underscore that, just in case the lawyers are on the call. But on the downside, it meant that when we're training with this equipment, we have to let them know as a disclaimer, this is not CBRN quality equipment. And so if you're buying equipment or if you're looking to source equipment, you don't want this stuff. This is great for training. It's not great for use. In fact, it's not going to really help you much at all. All these things, the masks, the helmets, the showers, we were able to buy, off of commercially available websites, which actually helped bring down the cost, which is actually an added bonus that we hadn't anticipated. For instance, those showers you see on the left, those are decon showers. They function the same as you would decon, but if you put decon showers or CBRN showers or hazardous material showers, they're going to cost 10 times more. These are basically poolside showers. I think we sourced them for under $100. And they accomplish what we need to accomplish for the purposes of the training. And talk about training, we had to get creative. When the situation required, and we had to spend some time underground, just out of precautions, we would conduct CBRN training in the bomb shelters or the garages of the facilities that we were training, just to make sure that continuity was not interrupted. Because we had very strict protocols. Whenever there was an air raid alarm, we had to stop training and go to a shelter. And then, so we just started embracing that and saying, well, why don't we just train in the shelter so for educational continuities, so we wouldn't get interrupted. And that worked out really, really well. And so you can see some of our other colleagues here teaching other trainings. And so once again, I think the role is of the type of work that we do is to adapt and overcome and still maintain safety. And so we were able to train them in all different types of scenarios. Here we simulated a nighttime attack. You have to imagine that many military type of attacks that would target civilians would come not in broad daylight when everyone has their capabilities and everyone is at the hospital and you're fully staffed. They're going to come at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning when everyone's sleeping and there's no light. They may even take out the power grid. And so we had them bring their own lights. And so this was a great simulation. We trained them outside for scenes that they may come across where people there'd be mass casualties and they would have to decon people. We trained them inside and outside as well. Various levels of victims. By the way, there were no mannequins harmed in any of these trainings. But where we had a mannequin that was simulating a red tag in disaster medicine, a red tag, someone who has a high level of acuity, is unconscious or non-ambulatory. We'd use these mannequins that you see on the left that were life-size and heavy, so you needed multiple people, as well as some of the walking wounded or green tag or yellow tag if you're a mass casualty management aficionado. One of the things we started getting them really prepared for is to receive a large influx of patients that were contaminated into their emergency rooms, and setting up a situation that they can do rapid decon, high throughput decon. And this is just one setup that we set up in one of our training centers, where you have the women on the left and the men on the right, obviously for cultural sensitivity purposes. We also practice in a kind of a low resource environment. We acknowledge the fact that in a conflict or in a war, critical infrastructure may be interrupted or destroyed. And so how do you decontaminate? And you'll hear me say decon, so I do apologize. The decon is short for decontaminate. How do you decontaminate in the setting of no water, right? 90% of decontamination is water and removal of the clothes. So you can remove the clothes, but if you don't have water and there's visible gross contamination, how do you do that? And so we embrace that scenario in which the Ukrainians may not have water, because a lot of places they had interruptions of water frequently or interruptions of power, and we use that as a training tool. And so here they're doing dry decontamination on a mannequin. Radiological and nuclear attacks were obviously of high concern, and they still are of high concern. And so we were able to get some very basic personal dosimeters, which is what you're seeing that responder, that trainee use to measure radiation levels on a responder. Now, this is all simulated. Obviously, there's no radiation on this person. but they're going through the motion. So if they ever do get the real equipment and they're already placed in those situations, they have that muscle memory and they remember that they have what they have to do in order to detect radiological contamination. And that was supported by effort the E part of CBRN is explosives. And we acknowledge that most of what they're seeing and most of what you will see in the conflict zones are blast injuries. And so to be able to train individuals on how to stop critical bleeding in the field was important. We integrated, this was a standalone course, Stop the Bleed, run by one of our HHI project leads, Catalina. And it was so well received in country that we decided to integrate that into all of our trainings, as well as train people on how to train people. So once again, it's kind of like building, not only building capacity, but it's also amplification of critical skills. And this is probably the most important thing we taught. We were also able to go to hospitals and do trainings, which were really, really important. And I'd never seen a reinforced hospital until I got to Ukraine, but they're there. And one of the things that I think is important to appreciate is, because in our lifetime, everyone on this call, in our lifetime, we've never had a hot war on US soil. And what would our hospital look like if there was a hot war on our soil? And so it allowed me to kind of think about things that we can bring back as a team back to the States for our domestic preparedness and what to expect. This is just more photos of hospital training. If any of you EMS or pre-hospital or mass ED or mass casualty folks on the call, you'll be familiar with this kind of iteration of a mass casualty tag or a mass casualty incident tag or MCI tag. It's pretty universal. The red is for high level acuity patients, usually difficulty breathing, a severe blood loss, someone who's probably not going to make it too long, probably have the golden hour. The yellow tag is someone who's injured, but they have a little bit more time. The green tag is what we would commonly call a walking wounded. And if you're a black tag, you're deceased. And so, this is consistent throughout most of Europe and the United States, this triage system. We were able to conduct these trainings at the hospital. They were very engaged, once again, allowing us to bring the training to the actual location where they may do it, brought a level of realism that we weren't able to get when we were doing it at a fixed training center or training site that was off-site from these facilities. And we were also able to take a look and get a firmer understanding of how they would do CBRN and almost provide some consultation in the training. And so remember those triage tags. So now you place a tag on these individuals, and then they're cohorted based on their level of acuity. So here you have the green tag section, the yellow tag section, and the red tag section. It's very rudimentary compared to what we would do in the States, but that's perfectly fine because it works for them, and we work around what they do. The worst thing you can do in a crisis or disaster is try to introduce a foreign concept or something that's not going to be sticky for them. And so what myself and Tim have learned, and many of the other leads in this project, is to take what they have and amplify and augment it, to try to make it better within the confines of what they feel comfortable and what they can actually do. And this slide's a really good example of that. This on the left is where they would put used PPE. On the right, this hospital facility acknowledged that they have interrupted water supply, and they keep 20 gallons of water on the ready outside the hospital if they have to do decontamination. If they do have to do decontamination, once again, this is a very rudimentary, low austere setup, but it's a setup, right? And it's better than nothing. And so there goes the table that they would put patients on if they were unconscious or non-ambulatory to do decon. And then those are the decon showers, which are very simple and no maintenance, not as reliable as some of the stuff we would spend in the States, that we buy in the States, but the spending that we do in the States is astronomical compared to what they're able to do out there. And so they're able to pipe the water, the runoffs. Some of you folks are this is just an answer to many questions I get. Well, what do they do with the runoff? So the next slide is, okay, this is what they do with the runoff for that contaminated water. They kind of snake it around the back to the out of the hospital, out of the way of where people would be. And then once those patients are decontaminated, they're brought into an emergency room type of construct that requires some more organization. And in our next phase, we're going to be assisting them with developing SOPs to try to modernize what they do in terms of their patient flow and tracking and how they treat patients. And so that's going to be really exciting. Once again, really working within the confines of what they have. This is a very austere emergency room setup, but it's very common in Ukraine. It's a very post-Soviet era Spartan type of setup. And so it's just really exciting to be part of an effort to help them modernize and do more with less. Once again, you see that common theme of, this is where the yellow tags go, this is where green tags go, this is where the red tags go. We have another line of effort, and I don't know if that was in the org chart. Hopefully it was. I can't recall. Eric Renolick from HHI is working with a great team to produce videos and put online. Some of the videos pertain to other things, but some of them also pertain to CBRN. So it's not just CBRN centric. It really spans all the lines of effort. And these videos have literally been viewed millions of times. And so they're really great to work with a team that's able to provide. This is almost just-in-time training. Very quick vignettes, no more than 4 or 5 minutes that they can log on to if they and do just-in-time training or refresher training. They've been really well received, so much so that Eric and his team were acknowledged by the Clinton Foundation last year. So kudos to them. Also links, we put links to those videos if you just want to peruse them, and the PowerPoint, which you'll get after this. And so what did this lead up to? We've really, with a small team, we've been really effective over the last 2.5 years in a country that's really involved in a major conflict. There's been 12 publications, more to come. We've conducted 46 CBRN classes. Average class size is 20. We've had some classes with, one of our classes had 70. And so those aren't small numbers. We're not talking about 46 with 10 people. We're talking about, I think the minimum is 20. So we've touched a lot of individuals, and we've been able to train individuals that have been able to go on and train other individuals. And I think that's the capacity building that we're looking to do here. We've worked in 13 cities across Ukraine, as you saw on the previous map slide. We've had 111 instructors trained. And from that, we've taken the best of the best, the cream of the crop, and we've made 19 master instructors. And so, as I like to tell Sean Kiblahan, who's overseeing this project, it's like, we have the Jedi Masters, and now we need the Jedi Master instructors. So think about, for all you Star Wars fans, those 19 individuals are like Yoda. We don't have to go there and do this level of training. We have master instructors that can train instructors that can train people how to do this training. And that's phenomenal, considering the situation on the ground there, the amount of time that we've had to work with these individuals. Really, I'll be honest with you, a very limited budget. To be able to do this really requires a level of dedication that you see on both sides of the equation. Our Ukrainian counterparts are really, I'm a New Yorker, so this is the only way I can say it, they're in it to win it. They're there every day. They show up early. They stay late. They reach out to us. They text me all the time. And they're really dedicated to this mission. And I've never, in all my entire career, I've never worked with a more dedicated group of individuals than the folks at HHI. And so when you have those type of forces put together, really the sky's the limit. And we're able to accomplish some of the things you see here in a very, very short amount of time. 7 conferences and presentations. We had a Radcliffe event that went really very well last year in Cambridge, which brought NATO secretary, the deputy secretaries there, Secretary of State from Romania, who's a key player in Ukrainians' humanitarian response. And so we just really happy about the work that we've done. And once again, here's listed. So if you're with any of these partner organizations, Mass General, Boston Children's, Brigham, you can't do this without a huge team. So can't acknowledge everybody, but just a few publications, because I know some of you guys are really, really hungry for that stuff. We'll list that here. More to come, obviously. It's hard to work and plan and write. I don't tell you guys, you all in the struggle. One of the things I do want to point out is that the number of publications doesn't really speak to the level of commitment that we have. We will not publish anything about Ukraine without a Ukrainian colleague. And so you'll see here individuals, Anna, Oleg, Kirillo, these individuals we worked with on the ground, they've been with us from day number one. We're just not putting them on the papers. They're contributing greatly to the papers. And so we're proud to be listed with them as co-authors. And that's just that is just a rule that we have. We will not go in there, collect data, and write about Ukrainians without Ukrainians there. And so you'll see that consistent with some of the other publications of our other colleagues. And lastly, I think for me, it's been really eye-opening, because I remember I talked about that kind of dichotomy between humanitarian disasters and CBRN. I have two literally separate classes here at Georgetown for that, and it's really made me reimagine what a humanitarian disaster is and the potential. And so an accidental or intentional release of CBRN can, in and of itself, create a humanitarian disaster. You know, just a few minutes ago, I showed you a very brief clip of what happened in Syria. That was with an existing humanitarian crisis, and then they dropped sarin. And many of you recall that incident. It was a terrible incident. A lot of people died. The other thing is that there were actually humanitarian workers on the ground when that happened. And I know a physician who was deployed there that treated patients in a humanitarian capacity. And so humanitarian workers, once again, the other kind of eye opener for us is that humanitarian workers may be already on ground in country when something like this happens. And are they being deployed with the training and the equipment required to protect themselves? Forget about treat patients, just to protect themselves if something happened. And I think universally the answer is no, which is why we found, when we started doing this training, a lot of the NGOs that were doing work in Ukraine were actually sending their security staff and some of their medical teams to our training, because we opened it up to anybody to get this training for themselves. And they said, you know, they walk up to us, and I don't want to mention the NGO or the humanitarian organizations, like, we don't have any of this stuff. And so we said, well, stay, do the trainer, we'll give you all this stuff, because that's our mission, right? Like, we're not making money off of this. We're not profiting off of this. It's about the mission. And lastly, the use of CBRN is a legitimate concern in conflict settings. I don't think that the U.S. government would be, you know, I don't have intel on this, but I can read the tea leaves as a former intel chief. There wouldn't be this much attention on the potential use of a CBRN agent, or the potential use of a radiological nuclear agent, if there wasn't some real founded fears and kind of like the darkest, deepest holes of government. And so the question is, are we ready in the humanitarian space? Are we protected ourselves, and are we able to kind of extend those sensibilities and those capabilities to our partners? And obviously, last thing is, you know, it's hard to not get attached when you're doing these deployments, but I'm caught. I'm attached. I love my Ukrainian friends. We were texting this weekend. I was at the Yankees game in the Bronx, and I had one of my friends, you know, texting me live, sending him photos, because he loves the Yankees. He's in Ukraine. It's probably 2 o'clock in the morning, but he's up. And so, you know, the bond is there, and I think that makes the mission even more rewarding for me personally. I can't speak for everybody, but I can tell you that everyone on the team has Ukrainian friends, and they probably do the same thing in text, and they wish him happy birthday and all this other stuff. So I'll stop there. I think it's good timing. And I guess we'll open up the questions. Hopefully they're softballs.
Yes, and Donell, thank you so much for that. And, and thank you to the whole team that's worked on this project. It's really an important topics. And everyone who works in this space, especially, asks why you go into these situations. And I think you capture it well. And I think it's the people there and the impact that you make on a daily scale. Just as we were waiting for getting some questions in, I thought since I have the floor, I thought I'd bring this back home a little bit. You talked a lot about CBRN being relevant to conflict zones, but just recently with Helene, the hurricane, there's a lot of discussions about chemical spills, the threats to some of the retired nuclear plants in Florida. So, it touches home here too, and there's threats there as well. So, what are your thoughts on these type of training domestically? Should this be part of the training for humanitarians, in even public health workers and first responders? So, what are your thoughts there?
That's a great insight. And I was thinking about that the other day when I was watching on the news, and they were showing like a river that wasn't a river before. It was like a main street in one of these towns, and there was water flowing like a river, and there were propane tanks floating on the water. The more technologically advanced we get, the more we rely on these CBRNs, right? And it doesn't have to be nefarious, someone cooking up biological agents in the lab. It can be a biological lab that has some type of biosafety breach and something gets out. It can be a chemical facility. I mean, you live in the United States, you know that every year somewhere we have a large chemical explosion, West Texas or, something like that. And so the more we rely on these chemicals to just do our day-to-day life, the more we expose ourselves to the potential for a CBRN event. And so, yes, not only does it hit home, but I've been able to really, I'll be honest with you, I'll be very transparent with you. When I got out to Ukraine, I didn't have all the equipment I wanted. It wasn't the ideal, optimal scenario. I wanted to be like a diva, like I'm from New York. I'm like, I can't do this. I'm out of here. I'm done. I don't have water. I don't have this. Where's my machines? But we embrace that. And it's actually, I've been able to bring back those sensibilities and talk to our US counterparts. I've met with the FEMA administrator. I've met with people from the DOD, and I've posed them the same question. How would we do CBRN without the tech? How would we do CBRN without the technology that's available to us? Right? And they all scratch their heads, because CBRN, if you understand CBRN countermeasures, combating weapons of mass destruction, is all very reliant on high-tech sensors. There's BioWatch in all of your cities, in Boston, in New York, in DC, where I'm at. There's sensors that detect radiological and biological agents dispersed. You may not have realized that they're in the subways, they're in the streets, they're all over the place. And so what if the power is not out? The power is out. What if you don't have any water? What if your facility, what if the facility, the hospital facility is degraded in some way? How would you go about that? These are all things I think that we've learned from working in Ukraine that we can bring back here, and not just use those experiences to inform our response here, but also share with other partners that we've been working with in other regions.
Thank you so much for that. I see Lily hands up.
Yes, hi, Dr. Harvin, thank you so much for the talk and especially for the work. I'm also a New Yorker, so I feel you. So, regarding the training, and I was wondering about your opinion on the CBRN agents themselves, because sadly, I think the evolution of the agents themselves could be could become more toxic over time, could become more lethal over time. I'm sad to say that, but how do you think the training will have to adjust to address things like that?
Absolutely. And I think you must be spying in my class. So I teach, this semester, I teach 2 classes. One of them is terrorism and weapons of mass destruction. And we have a whole module on the evolution of CBRN weapons, particularly AI, large language models, machine learning, and the advances that are pushing a lot of the dual use applications. And so that's not only a concern for me as a student of this, but also for the US government and other individuals that are actively out there trying to combat weapons of mass destruction. Just a year and a half ago, a team of researchers who had an AI model decided to do a demonstration. I don't know if you've heard this, you can look this up. And they basically reversed their AI model to from making therapeutic applications to making toxic applications. And in 6 hours, they're able to create 30,000 novel chemical agents. And so large language models will help connect the dots for maligned actors that otherwise would not be able to interpolate some of the or overcome some of the technological hurdles that they had a year or two ago. And obviously, when you look at the biotechnology, CRISPR, all the gene editing stuff, before you needed a PhD to and be well financed and have a team to create a biological agent. Now you can be a high school kid, to be quite honest with you, with the amount of how low the threshold for technology has gotten because the technology has gotten so big, access to the technology. So yeah, it's a big concern.
Yeah, thank you.
Maple, can you come offline? I see you posted the questions in the chat.
Hopefully I didn't depress everybody.
I'm sorry, I am commuting at the moment into Cambridge, and so my video was off. But do we have a best and worst case scenario of how AI and LLM can change the CBRN landscape? How can we counter it, and how should we be using AI LLM to counter this development?
That's a great question. I'm actually working with a researcher who's doing his PhD out in Sydney as part of the Eurasia group. There are no guardrails for AI currently. And as we know, technology is, I'm just gonna throw a number out there, it could be wrong. It's just a good number to grasp onto. Technology is generally like a decade ahead of legislation, right? And I can say that because I work here and I advise lawmakers on the Hill. By the time lawmakers will catch up to the guardrails that are necessary, we just continue to push and push. So what we've done historically is we've relied on the developers, the scientists to self-regulate. But we see that I don't think that's a sustainable model. Because one of the things we do in our CBRN course that we teach in Ukraine is we talk about the history of CBRN. The history of CBRN is replete with scientists and physicians that have had maligned intent, right? You only have to go, I'll give you a couple of examples. Major Ishishiro, who's the Japanese leader of Unit 731, was a trained physician who basically created a biological and chemical concentration camp in northern China, in Manchuria, to do live experiments on captured PIs and civilians, giving them a host of biological and chemical agents and doing studies on them, including children. We have Fritz Haber, who is actually we consider the grandfather of chemical weapons, developed many of the chemical weapons that were used in Nazi concentration camps. A few years early, had won the Nobel Peace Prize for his nitrogen processes. And so throughout history, we've found people that have walked away from their Hippocratic oath, or scientists who've had maligned intent use their knowledge for evil. I know that sounds cliche. The reason why I say that is because I don't believe that you can rely on science, the scientific community, or any of these developers for these sophisticated tools to self-regulate.
Thank you
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I see here another questions from Roger. Roger, do you want to go offline?
Sure. Thank you, Donell. Great presentation and great to see you again. So I'm super interested in this discussion about AI and tech and all that. And I'm wondering if there are any protocols or standards or anything you can share about handling cyber attacks, or if that's something that's come up that you can chat a little about.
Well, you threw me the easiest question of the day, Roger, because the answer is no. Next question. No, there's absolutely nothing. In fact, Roger, I think one of the things, because I'm not a humanitarian. I was kind of like brought into this towards the end of my career, right? I'm not a humanitarian person. I'm a public health person. My public health chops are really in this biological and radiological nuclear space. That's where my master's is in. My other master's is in terrorism studies, and my doctor is in environmental epidemiology. So I'm really squarely focused on this. What Ukraine has showed the defense people, like my RAND friends, is that the wars and the conflicts of tomorrow will be a multi-layered conflict. If it's a sophisticated adversary, that will generally begin with cyber, which is exactly how the Ukraine conflict began, and then lead to a degradation of critical infrastructure, right? Critical infrastructure that's necessary to defend yourself against things, and then kinetic, and then perhaps CBRN. And so there'll be this multi-layered approach that no one really has, and I would include the DoD has a solution for, because a lot of most of the critical infrastructure in this country and many other countries is private sector, and the government can't regulate that.
Thank you so much. You know, we have another questions from Nishiwa as well. So Nishi, would you want to go back online to ask the questions if you're still there?
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much for a wonderful seminar. I'm Yoshi from Japan in Takemi program, GHP. And I have a question on the mid to long-term effect of such possible disasters. Is there any sorts of training or supporting such, not only immediate, but also mid to long-term supporting things?
Yeah, there's no training. That's a huge area that needs to be developed. Most of the training, if any, most of the training and protocols are geared towards mitigation, which is reducing the impact. Response, a lot of money is thrown into response, particularly here in the States. Past that, you really don't have anything. Some of the public health folks are pretty attuned. Maybe you've done a paper or studied this. Really, the advent of health registries, I would say, would be the closest thing that you can get to start tackling and understanding the long-term health effects. There's a few health registries that I think are informative in this space that could be used. The first is one I'm enrolled in, which is the World Trade Center Health Registry. I was a responder on 9/11 for the fire department, and every year I go and get a full workup, total assays, chest X-rays, all of that. I was there on Monday, which is why I was in the city, New York City, getting a full exam. And they've accumulated 20 years of data, and that helps inform the patient about their outcomes. Another good registry is the Deepwater Horizon Health Registry that was started after that oil spill. And these things are very labor intensive. They're very, very expensive. And the juxtaposition there is the tracking that was done after Chernobyl, right? How poor that was done. And so I think you're spot on. I think a position paper or white paper to address that would be part of the recovery from something like this would be important. But as an environmentalist, I would also add, what is the environmental impact, right? Particularly of a radiological or nuclear event with the current situation that we have. The last time a nuclear weapon was used was 80 years ago, right? And so we don't, and the infrastructure, the way we live, the way we interact with our environment, how we eat, how we get our water is completely different than it was 80 years ago in Japan, for instance. And so the models that are being used really are based off of a lot of that Hiroshima and Nagasaki data. But the weapons are 100 times more powerful, right? And so there's a disconnect there between the science and the application of these weapons and mitigation that I think needs to be addressed. So that's not a great answer, but I think you're onto something in terms of that is a gap in the research and a gap in the applied science.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have another questions from a faculty member, Aya. She also leads a course looking at Hiroshima in Japan's in this fall as well. So
Thank you. I have been working as a public health doctor for the restoration activity after the Fukushima nuclear power plant accident. And I'm very curious to know if there are any seaborne educational materials for the general public, because for the nuclear power plant accident, the public didn't know much about it, and there was a huge hassle. So yeah.
Yeah, well, your timing is perfect because we're actually in the process of going to start developing something like that at HHI. Different courses to address this for different target groups. Now, currently, you'll have a limited selection of, if you wanted to point your students or anybody else towards this, you'll have a limited selection of online programming through FEMA. It's called FEMA ISP, Independent Study Program. 3 online trainings, usually an hour or 2. But I don't think that they're comprehensive. In fact, we've been talking with FEMA to kind of collaborate with them because the threats are so much more than they were before. And I like the Fukushima example. It's actually akin to the Chernobyl example. What many people don't understand is that Hiroshima and Nagasaki are beautiful, thriving cities now, but Chernobyl is a no-go land, and it will be that way for hundreds of years, quite possibly thousands. And so the physics behind the difference between a nuclear incident and a radiological incident are totally different. How long these materials stay in the environment, and those are nuances that most public don't have available to them.
Thank you.
thank you. We have another questions from Maple here too. Maple, do you want to unmute yourself? If not, I can.
Yes, of course. Sorry, it's quite noisy in the background here. I'm just wondering if I've missed anything in the first half, but is there anything we can do upstream to prevent the creation and dissemination of seabird? I think what I find really worrying is during my time doing the MPH at Chan, I was approached by somebody to ask if I was interested in bioterrorism, and not from like oh, are you interested in researching it? They were looking for doctors that were malaligned and who would potentially help them in the creation of like these kind of weapons. And so I totally hear what you say. Just because we're doctors, it doesn't mean that we have good intentions all the time. And I'd really like to know, what can we be doing as a global health community to prevent the creation and dissemination of this?
Yeah, well, the first thing I'll say is hopefully you reported that to the proper authorities, because we are aware that, and I'll be very frank with you, high-level institutions such as Harvard and Georgetown and the Ivy Leagues are places that malign doctors will look to recruit, deceive, or compromise scientists like us who have knowledge into assisting them with some of their more aligned intents. And so you can contact me offline if you want some advice on how to handle it, if you weren't able to handle it appropriately. But these institutions are fertile ground for individuals, knowingly or unknowingly. There is a whole nother issue. So from a global health community, I think our job is preparedness. Teaching this, having a session on this in your class. If there's anything that dovetails, I'm more than happy to come in virtually, or if I'm in town in person and do a guest lecture. If you're a professor, if you have a program in this space, but it also is about awareness and making sure that the people you're training, you're working with, are aware that there are maligned applications to everything we do in science. Science is value neutral, and basically the value depends on the person that's applying that science.
Donell, thank you so much. It's 2:00 and I realized that we ran out of time, but thank you everyone for attending GHP's Brown Bag seminar today. So happy to have you here. We will be sending out the presentations and as well as the recording of this afterward. Thank you again, Donell, and happy birthday.
Great, thank you. Bye, everybody.